Hello and welcome to episode 33 of the Teacher's Tea Time podcast. My name is Mark and I hope you're doing well. This podcast is about, by and for anyone who has ever had anything to do with schools and education. That's almost everybody. We're proud to be a member of Edjacent, a design collaborative that connects educators to their legacy. Learn more at edjacent.org. I have a mug of tea ready, so let's sit back, relax, and get on with the show. In today's episode, we shared a final part of my conversation with Edjacent designer Jared Fritzinger. We've been talking about Capstone projects, and the ecobus in particular. And today we're going to conclude by investigating the idea of educators as artists. I always enjoy chatting with Jared, and we talk about so many things in our time together. In fact, we probably need another couple of hours to talk about even more things that came up just from this conversation. So maybe that's a project we can put together for next year. But if you haven't listened to the previous part of the interview, I suggest you go back and listen to episodes 29 to 31. They'll give you context as to where today's conversation is coming from and where we might go in the future. In ways of pushing the boundaries. And I know you one of the things you do with us here at Edjacent is you talk about teachers being artists a lot. So I'm curious to sort of bring this all around to this point of teachers as artists or educators as artists. And you know, we can kind of get a feel from what you've already said, but flesh that out for me.
Well, so when I think of people who are artists, I think of people who challenge boundaries, but also do it in a way that where they're really digging in for themselves, right? And I'm not saying that so I'm going to operate off of a musical paradigm because that's the world I know. Like, I'm not saying somebody who got picked up by a major label and who has had that easier path, like a pop star or something, is not an artist, because I've seen, some very beautifully challenging art come out of the pop idiom. The first 45 record I owned as a kid was Madonna's Lucky Star. Like, find me somebody who's a more challenging artist over the years than her. Absolutely. Right. And so, mad respect. But my North Star for that sort of stuff were people who didn't have that, because honestly, in my teaching journey, and people are going to say that maybe I do, because there's this fundamental misconception about gifted education that all I have to do is just, the kids are thoroughbred horses and I just got to smack them on the butt and watch them run. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a huge misconception.
Which is absolutely wrong.
Knowing your school population, most of those are twice exceptional, just gifted. There's all sorts of other things going on. They need different care,
Sure. I see it in my own house. I'm pretty sure I'm raising a gifted learner who's a 4-year-old, and it requires a whole lot of creative thinking. And so, on the one hand, I'm working with a population that's very exceptional and that I can get a lot out of. I will be very clear that I believe that whatever I'm getting out of my kids, you could get out of any kid.
Absolutely. Yeah. And good pedagogy should be available for everybody, not just because you're gifted or you've got an IEP or whatever. That's one of those fallacies we have in our system is we say, well, we're going to say this special good teaching for a certain population. It's not very equitable. But that's exactly right. And as teachers, we've got to be doing better.
Yeah. And so the artistry piece, I've always really identified with people who are do-it-yourselfers, because who didn't have necessarily the support mechanisms, who were part of a something. And punk rock generally exists in this category where it's something that enough people love it because of what it does and what it says, but it does exist on the margins. There's been a few that have broke through over the years, but those bands have had to radically alter their sound away from, their original, like the Clash, for instance. By the time the Clash were a major label artist, the Clash were essentially bringing in lots of more palatable, musical styles into what they were doing. I mean, White Riot does not sound like Rock the Casbah. They're both great songs, but one makes them able.
And why did their last album suck? Because it was too poppy. So
right,
that was it. Yeah,
and one, but one of those styles makes them able to open Shea Stadium for the Who, and the other one has them playing at the local pub. And I get it. So my thing is, like, I've actually always enjoyed, my North Star are artists who were able to transcend that, doing what they wanted. Because, and the reason I'm relating that is because, like, in the educational system, people are not lining up necessarily to, like, give things to guys like me. I know your reader or your listeners can't see me, but, like, I have tattoos stemming stem to stern. I have the most horrific vocabulary, like I use F-bombs as, like, verbs. I can be abrasive because I'm very bad at small talk. I don't really like teachers very much because I don't like the crab pot mentality. I don't like how snipey and backbitey. I don't do Twitter very well. I'm not good at shining people on, like all the things that, like, make you win Teacher of the Year. I'm just not those things naturally. And so, like, that puts me in a place where people aren't necessarily, like, sort of lining up to be like, hey, let's elevate this dude and give him things, So I've had to sort of, like, make this pathway to myself. So, like, I always tell people my North Star for punk rock was a dude named Ian MacKaye, who your listeners may recognize, probably don't, but Ian MacKaye was, he was the leader of two Washington, D.C. punk bands, and D.C.'s right up the road from me. So that's, sort of my scene. Two Washington, D.C. punk bands, Minor Threat, who were sort of credited with creating hardcore punk or being one of on the cutting edge of hardcore punk early on. And then this band called Fugazi. And Fugazi was, like, sort of my North Star because, like, in the era where, like, the Nirvanas and the Soundgardens and, like, the bigger grungy bands were breaking through, like, Fugazi was doing it too, but with zero major support. Like, Ian MacKaye started his own record label in Washington, D.C. called Discord Records. Discord Records' ethos was, we are only going to document bands from within the Washington, D.C. city limits. Like, this is our scene. This is our creative universe. We're only going to document those bands. And Fugazi's job thing was, we are only going to play $5 shows. We are not going to sell merchandise. And not only that, but Fugazi's whole thing was about the experience. I've heard Ian MacKaye give lots and lots of interviews where he said most bands make records so they can go tour, or they go tour so they can sell the record. He said, we thought that was the dumbest thing ever. He said, the whole thing about being in a band is to play for people, because the experience of being together and experience this creative moment in a room is what music is all about. So we make the records just so you get an idea of what you're going to experience. So he said, we always say the record is the menu, the show is the meal. And so for me, that is what the classroom experience is. I don't make lesson plans. I've never made one. Well, honestly, because, like, I helped write the curriculum. So, like, the sequence of teaching and learning in the curriculum, like, why would you need the stupid lesson plan, right? Like, because it's right there. Like, today I'm supposed to be doing this, and I plan that out with my colleagues. Like, today we're on this, or right around it. And I know those activities. So why am I going to be like, well, for the first 5 minutes, I'm going to do, good God, dude. Because I think that's soul sucking. Fugazi never wrote set lists. Same sort of thing. Like, I write set lists when I play with my bands because it's a little different. Not everybody's Fugazi, but, the point is, like, I bring those ethics into what I do. Like, the classroom experience with me, that's the meal. Like, everything else we do around it, like, it supports that. It supports it and backs up what you're supposed to know. But us immersed in the room together, working in groups, discussing, moving around, that is the work. With Capstone, it's the same thing. Like, Capstone I've specifically over the years resisted and bucked against trying to make too much of Capstone into a codified curriculum, because it needs that flexibility, because the real work is being embedded together and just doing the work, process over product, right? And, like, a show is a process. You're seeing this creativity unfold in front of your eyes, and you're experiencing it in real time, and whatever feelings that you're having in that moment, experiencing it, are your real feelings in the moment, regardless of how you think of them later. I mean, there are bands I remember, dude, I wouldn't listen to a Blink-182 album right now if you paid me. But I can remember the first time I saw them at Peabody's in Virginia Beach, and just like my mind was blown out of my skull. Just like, this is like, my God, you know what I'm saying? Like I was all in, and that was a gateway drug to lots of different stuff. So like to me, when you're teaching as an artist, that's what it is. Like you've got a foundational idea of what you're trying to do. But that you are not necessarily marrying yourself to orthodoxy, right? Orthodoxy exists. I mean, there's just certain parts of the game that you just have to adhere to. It's just like anything else, you know what I'm saying? But I mean, it's like I've never met a band that made music that was worth a damn, that played out of tune.
Yeah.
You got to be in tune. You got to there's things you got to do, but to take the analogy to where it needs to be, is that there's that fundamental idea of what good instruction is about, and aligning it and meeting the needs of your students. That's what you've got to be doing. Now, our job is, because we're supposed to be trained instructional designers, is to design those experiences for our students that it all happens. And that's the art. Mm-hmm. And I get really annoyed when people work in school systems where they're given scripted curriculum, or they're buying all these, or say, you've got to follow this plan and do this one test that we've got here. And because that deprofessionalizes the teacher and takes away their level of artistry, and it doesn't meet the students' needs, and it takes away the teacher's ability to do that too. I mean, sure. The population just wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. I agree. It's if you wanted me to be an automaton, tell me up front, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is it? There's this really doofy movie called Airheads, about three dudes who take over they're in a band called the Lone Rangers, and they take over a radio station with all squirt guns filled with hot sauce because they want to get their demo played on the air. And the record company guy wants to make them pantomime at the end. Mm-hmm. And they just look at me and go, don't make me be lame. Yeah. I find myself saying that all the time. Don't make me be lame. You know what I'm saying? And some people are going to hear this and think it's oh, well, you sometimes when you're a dude like me, especially, you get slapped with this cool teacher moniker. And I'm I have no desire to be the cool teacher, quote unquote. I don't want to be friends with these children. I tell them all the time, we are not friends. I'm not trying to do anything that I wouldn't do in my normal life. I happen to be interested in youth culture because I was always interested in youth culture. You know what I'm saying? Because youth culture is the culture. Whatever we try to think otherwise, the youth culture is the culture.
Whatever's happening, that's the important thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And it even affects things that aren't supposed to be. Punk rock is totally infected by it right now. There are kids coming up making mind-bendingly awesome punk rock music, and older punk rock heads don't like it because it doesn't sound like the Sex Pistols. And I'm just dude, you got to get out of here with that. Or they can't embrace, somebody said to me the other day, they were the rock star is dead. What happened to the rock star? So the rock star is not dead. His name's Kendrick Lamar. He's black and he's from South Central LA. And that dude is living a rock star lifestyle. You just don't listen to him.
Yeah.
It's so when I think of artistry, it's really about all the things that you said and authenticity, right? Yeah. I'm just not going to allow something to walk into my classroom or have something come out of my mouth or make its way into my lessons, or make its way into my interaction with a student that isn't authentically me. When it comes down to Edjacent, I told Megan many times, I said, because she always wanted to know, when it comes down to somebody like you, what is the purpose of this? And I said, well, you're the record label. I said, so when I think of there's independent record labels, I love them, And one of the reasons that people love them so much is because like there's a couple things that they do. One, they leave artists alone. Because generally speaking, independent record labels are started by people who just love certain types of music. They were either in a band doing it, and started put like an Ian MacKaye or like a Mike Burkett, otherwise known as Fat Mike from NoFX, who runs a record label called Fat Records. They're either in a band doing it, and like they start putting out records because it's bands that they want to hear and it's stuff they're not hearing in the marketplace, or they're just fans, of like the people at Sub Pop, in Seattle, they're just music fans that wanted to have skin in the game, and it's like, so they generally leave artists alone. And the other thing that they do is they start to sort of develop a niche. You know what I'm saying? Like, I very much know like what I'm going to hear if I pick up a Discord Records release. Most of the time I'm going to hear something that maybe doesn't sound like everything that's on Discord, but I'm going to know full well that it was Ian MacKaye approved. So it's probably got some authenticity to it. Right. If I pick up, a release from lots of different labels, it's going to be like that. And so like, they're all serving the greater good of getting cool music to your ears, but they're doing it in one, it's not fully capitalistic. There's nobody from that record label walking into the band's studio and being like, I don't hear a single. What's going to be the radio single? Hey, you guys think you could wear matching ties or whatever the hell, comes out of that, or like holds money over their head or whatever. Like, no, they just say, look, we're fans of your band. We like what you do. If you want our input on it, we'll give it to you. But otherwise, you do you. And what we're going to do is figure out how to get that into as many ears as possible. We're going to take our cut based on what we've put into it, which is exactly, how that model should work, because it's not predatory capitalism. No. But you're going to get what you deserved out of it too. And like just about every indie record label I know of that is like reputable still to this day produces royalty checks on time. Like again, Ian MacKaye, I'll come back to him a million times, but like, I listen to him on interviews all the time because he'll talk to anybody. He's like, yeah, we've got records that have been out for 35, 40 years and maybe they'll sell 10 copies in a month, but that royalty check for $3 makes it to that person on time. You know what I'm saying? Like absolutely. Every single time.
Values the input of the artist, yeah.
Right. And so that's, when Megan asked me, how I saw Edjacent, I said, there's not a whole lot of spaces that, like, I'm allowed to be me now in the school system because I've got a pretty good track record of doing it. And I don't go out of my way to like, step on people's toes. I follow the rules, whatever rules like that are supposed to be followed, in terms of like whatever bureaucratic rules that they have du jour, I follow those rules. I don't buck those rules. I don't get in people's faces about stuff or whatever, so like they've learned to live with me and I produce things that are tangibly good things for the most part.
Absolutely.
But there are very few places where people like me in education are celebrated. You know what I'm saying? Or allowed, or like, I'm not even saying Edjacent is not a place that necessarily like, I mean, they have celebrated my work by publishing things that I've done and everything like that. And I'm certain that, anything that I do will always be promoted and celebrated because that's what good record labels do. And I think that, I wouldn't have signed my name on to being a part of it if I didn't think that it had that same sort of authenticity and that same level of that same goal structure. But, what it does do is it basically says whatever you are is something we like.
Absolutely.
Intrinsically, like your name, face, everything is on this website because we like it. That's the thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's just so much more we could talk about, I think, with how to build things. Maybe we need to do another 2-hour chat to put that conversation together, that bringing the authenticity into our work as teachers. But I think for now I'm just going to say thank you so much because it's been amazing to learn about your story and your bus and the adjacent idea of teachers as artists, because that really helps us articulate what we're all about.
One of the things my colleagues in Edjacent really value is the teacher's ability to be creative. In order to meet the demands and needs of our learners, we always have to go beyond the defined curriculum. And it's the way that teachers can do this which makes their approach to instructional design a real art form, rooted in the science of learning. I'm hoping we can investigate this concept further with other adjacent designers. Alternatively, if you have thoughts to share about the idea of educators as artists, don't hesitate to get in touch. Our email address is in the show notes. Talking of which, if you want to contact Jared directly, you can get in touch via Twitter at Jared Fritzinger or email him at jared@edjacent.org. These are in the show notes too. Next time, we're going to hear a couple more, or maybe just one more, educator story. But until then, that was episode 33 of the Teachers Tea Time podcast. This podcast is a proud member of Edjacent, a design collaborative that connects teachers to their legacy. If you are looking for community, coaching, or content based around your needs, point your browser to www.edjacent.org and become a member for less than the cost of a pumpkin spice latte a week. So go ahead and navigate to www.edjacent.org. That's www.edjacent.org and choose Become a Member. For me, it's the stories of teachers, students, and school communities that really matter. As such, this podcast is only possible with the help and support of its listeners. So please leave positive reviews wherever you are able. If you're an iTunes or a Spotify subscriber, leaving a good review can really help our visibility. Also, please don't keep this podcast to yourself. Tell your friends to subscribe and listen too. One thing we all have in common is that we've been to school. Everyone has an educational story to share. So if you'd like to contribute to the pod in any way, if you have a story to share, if it's long, if it's short, tragic or comic, if you have comments to make about the podcast or just want to say hi, you can send an email to teachersteatimetipod@gmail.com. Alternative, you can send emails to me directly using mark@edjacent.org. I love to read what you have to say. If social media is your thing, you can follow me on Twitter @MarkDearcop. You can find our contact information, copies of the show notes, and you can download previous episodes of the podcast at www.teachersteatimepod.com. The podcast artwork was created by Phaedra. Opening and closing music is by Bryan Boyko. It's been my pleasure to be your host today. Thank you for listening.